This isn't what you'd expect a nervous first-time mom to sound like. She should be sleep-deprived, anxious, worried, right? At the Christ Hospital Health Network, we try to build trust, give honesty and levity in equal measure, so you can ask any question, share any experience with someone who understands, someone that doesn't just sound like a doctor, but like a friend. The Christ Hospital Health Network, everything it takes.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 818, The Power of the Enneagram with Beth Johnson.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Pound This Podcast. Before I get into this fabulous conversation with Beth all about growth and the Enneagram, I want to tell you about a different kind of coach, not an Enneagram coach, but a health coach, and that would be Sarah and Team Fit With Me. Sarah has been my health coach in the past. Sarah has been a friend of this podcast for a very long time, and she does amazing work, especially if your goals are fat loss. She's got you there. She's got an entire team of people. She has lived through all of this herself, and she is obsessed with learning more. So if you're looking to lose weight, or you're looking to get stronger, or you just need somebody to hold you accountable, she will break down everything, do labs, see what's going on with you, whether you have gut issues or hormonal issues. She can figure that all out, help you with meal plans, help you with food that's going to fuel your body, workouts that are going to be the correct kind of movement for your body. She is amazing. And if you've looked into Sarah before and been like, oh, this maybe isn't my price range, she has changed her pricing. So just reach out and ask some questions. So if you're interested, if you're like, you know what, I've been trying to do this alone for too long and it's just not working, I need some guidance. And hey, man, we have all been there. Do not be afraid to ask for help. So just reach out to Sarah, ask some questions, see if she is the right fit for you to help you with your goals and get you started at a price that you can afford. So go to teamfitwithme.com, reach out to Sarah and see if she can help you. And if you're in Cincinnati and you're looking for some really convenient food options, which Sarah can work with into her meal plans too, check out Clean Eats in Newport. They have been a lifesaver for me, especially in the past year of going through divorce and life change. And now as I'm moving into a different house, of having the convenience and not having to meal prep for me, because I've been a prepper forever, it's been amazing. And there's so many options there too, of low carb, high protein, vegetarian. There's family style meals that you can get, whether you go get the frozen options or the fresh options. It's amazing. You don't have to do a subscription or anything. It's just as you need it, week to week, whatever serves you best. Because again, it's convenient, trying to make a healthy lifestyle sustainable and doable. So check out Clean Eats in Newport if you're here in Cincinnati. Chef's Kiss, they are amazing. Speaking of amazing, let's chat with Beth. Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. I am Amanda Valentine. I am very excited to dive into everything Enneagram, which I find super fascinating. And I know that Beth Johnson, my guest, also finds this super fascinating because you chose to just go ahead and do like a deep dive into it. Wasn't it through COVID that you're like, oh man, I'm really going to like learn all of the things about Enneagram?
Yeah. So someone had brought it up to me at work a few years prior to COVID. And the more I learned about it, the more I was realizing how much it was impacting my day-to-day and in my leadership position, the way I was interacting with other people. And even sometimes I would take someone the wrong way. And as I started to learn the Enneagram, I'd say, oh, wait, we have the same goal. We're just approaching it through a totally different lens. And the Enneagram kind of helped me to start exploring that. So when I left my job of 10 years to be at home with my kids during COVID, all of the Enneagram courses that I'd been wanting to take to become certified, they all went virtual. And so I was able to become a certified Enneagram teacher while also being at home with my kids during that COVID year. So I definitely got to take a deeper dive, which I was hoping to do. So
yeah, that's awesome. So now you're an official Enneagram coach. The name of your business is Bloom Where You're Planted. And yes. How is that feeling with this like transition to becoming an Enneagram coach and now helping other people through Enneagram?
It's so cool to watch people kind of dig through their stories and learn how they came to tell those stories, whether it's life experience or the people who raised them, or and which of those stories kind of still apply or stick, and which ones they keep telling themselves, but they no longer are serving them. And once you dig kind of underneath all of that ego and finding kind of where your type or your true self lies, those aha moments that people have of saying, oh, wait, this is the story I want to walk forward with. And these are the stories that I'm ready to like put on the shelf. And I think the Enneagram, unlike other personality systems, really can help people to do that and kind of take that next step in their growth path. So it's just really fun to watch people do that.
So I want to take a deeper dive into like what Enneagram is and what that all means here in a second. But before we get to that, like tell me about your background. Like what was your career that you worked in, that you focused on, that kind of like ended up leading you into having an Enneagram to help that career out?
Yeah, so I am a pediatric occupational therapist, and I am still that. I do both right now. Funny enough, my husband has asked me several times, so at what point are you going to choose between pediatric OT and Enneagram teacher? And I said, I'm not going to, because I love them both. And it is through being a pediatric OT that I learned about the Enneagram. So honestly, they're both such growth related careers. I love, so I lead with Enneagram type 1, which we can talk about later. But I feel like one of the gifts of type 1 is that I can see potential in other people that they can't see that yet in themselves. And whether I'm being an OT or an Enneagram coach, I feel like I can see that and help lead someone to it. So my career as an OT looks really different now than it used to. I see some private clients and I'm contracting in some schools. So I'm kind of hanging out with little kids part of my week, and then hanging out with grownups who want to grow the other part of my week. So they're very different, yet they have some of those similar strings that are really tied to kind of my heart. So
yeah, that's amazing. So what does Enneagram mean? I know there's probably people listening that are like, I've heard this before. Like, what does this mean? Like you hear personality test or the Myers-Briggs test, or like, but how is Enneagram different? And I'm sure you said that, you were kind of in the same way where your career led you to what this is. So you're just like, how would you easily explain, like, what the heck does this mean?
Right. So the Enneagram is a 9-pointed system. A lot of people are familiar with the figure. And so the number 9 is at the top and it goes around 1 to 9. And people over time, actually in separate cultures, without me getting too deep into all their names, came up and kind of realized, hey, there are these distinct cross-cultural. So even if you take away, depending on, where you're located, there are still these 9 types that surface, these 9 kind of overlying personality types. And each of the types tends to behave a certain way when they're stressed out. And they also tend to behave a certain way when they're relaxing or they're growing. And so because it came from different places at different times, and they came together and realized they were kind of studying the same thing, they more and more people, it was kind of this secret language for a while. And then people got a hold of it and it was really helping them. So they started to write books about it and it was not so secret anymore. And so unlike Myers-Briggs, which you mentioned, and I think it's helpful to know your Myers-Briggs type. I'm an INFJ. I don't know if you know yours.
You know what? I actually did it not too long ago and I wrote it down. Yeah. Let me check it. It's in my notes curious. In my phone, because I
should have asked you before if you knew. I think it's one of those.
I'm an ENFJA.
Oh, so we have our E and our I are only different. And so E and I, for those who don't know, are introvert or extrovert. And I fall right in between. I'm like 1% away from being an extrovert. So I always say that I'm an introverted extrovert. And so
I feel that way.
Yeah. So you might be an extroverted introvert, So I think that Myers-Briggs can be super helpful. But when you tell me I'm an introvert, there's not much there. Like, it's almost more of like, that's just what I am, whereas with Enneagram, there are so many layers of health to it. So some of the teachers that have done research with it out there have even identified like 9 different layers of health within each type. And so you can really behave in a much different way when you're accessing the more resourceful part of your type than when you're accessing kind of those less resourceful. I like to think of them as like your, oh crap, I'm doing that thing again. Like those things that we all do where we're like, I must be stressed. Like I'm doing that thing again. And so I may have described to you. So when we did our discovery session, I like to think of it as like 3 tree branches. And so kind of your average version of yourself, if you're climbing a tree, is kind of that middle big branch. When you're stressed out, we think of stress as a bad thing, but if you can think of the branch below your average as like the branch that catches you. So it is that, oh crap, I'm doing that thing again, but your stress type can kind of catch you when you're stressed and help you get back up. Like, so helping you get back up to average rather than thinking of it as like, I fell into a hole, which I think sometimes we can think of stress that way. And then the branch above that is what you have access to when you're at a more resourceful or a higher capacity of yourself. And so unlike, to wrap back around to Myers-Briggs, unlike just, me saying like, Amanda, you're a type 7, or Beth, you're a type 1. It's, yes, I identify most with this type, but I also have access to this full range of less resourceful and more resourceful characteristics, and to other types around the wheel, kind of around the circle of the Enneagram, that put me less in a box and more of a lot of Enneagram teachers say when you're living at your healthiest, you have access to the virtues of all 9 types, which are, the virtue of 9 is, having a more peaceful life, or having more serenity or having more joy, kind of those things that we all are striving for when we're just like able to be and like kind of be our true authentic self, if that makes sense.
Totally. Well, and what I thought was just super interesting is I've done this a couple times. I did an Enneagram test a few years ago on the podcast. So
Yep.
it's like, I've done this before with another coach, and it was, even when I did it then, I kind of like was neck and neck for 3 different numbers. So I was like almost exactly even as a 2, a 3, and a 7. And I'm like, I identified with all of them. And that what was interesting was whenever we did this together a couple months ago, how I also identify as so many other numbers, but like how I could see myself change because I've been in just so much like insane growth years the past several years of how some of the things I identified with, but I also identified of like, I used to do that. So I'm like, I'm still saying that's part of me. Like I've been that person, and I'm not exactly that person now, but I have been, and I recognize like some of those weaknesses within me. And so like, it's just so interesting of like, I identify as all of these things as, present and past, and also where I want to go in the future. So for me, it was like the same, but changing of like almost seeing like the evolution of me through the Enneagram, which I found like super interesting to do this at different points in my life. When I think we had the discussion remind me of like, isn't it typically like you don't change? Like, isn't it like once your numbers are there, you're not supposed to change them?
Right. So your core type doesn't change, but your capacity can change in that, hey, when I first took the test, which, my caveat for the test is that, and I should have mentioned this when I was talking about the Myers-Briggs. The Myers-Briggs is it's addressing or assessing your traits, right? And so like being an introvert or an extrovert, that's a trait. Whereas the Enneagram is assessing your motivation. That is really hard to do during a test because you and I might both be motivated to help people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we could be for totally different reasons. So if you went around the 9 types, all 9 types, when they're in a resourceful space, are motivated to help people as part of their human nature, but for very different reasons. So somebody might help someone because it's the right thing to do. Someone might help someone because they want to be seen as good, or they want them to help them again in return later. And so I think that once we start to study it and realize our motivation over time, our type doesn't change, but it definitely kind of has like a metamorphosis, right? Like, so you might have your highest capacity in 2, 3, and 7. You might have higher capacity in those numbers. And over time, as you grow, you might see more or less of those things, because you might be seeing more or less of like your resourceful or less resourceful behaviors. And I think that's why we have to be so careful not to just say like, I'm a 7 and that's that, or to say about someone else, oh, she's being such a 2, she always does this. Because I think we talked about tri-types when we met a few months ago, but so your tri-type is the 3 types you identify with in each of the head, heart, and gut triads. And so for those who aren't familiar with the Enneagram, types 8, 9, and 1 tend to be more gut centric or body centric types. 2, 3, and 4 are more heart centric. And then 5, 6, and 7 are more head centric. And so if you're a gut type, that doesn't mean you never use your heart or your head. And so that's what I love about this. And I think that kind of answers what you're saying. Your type doesn't change, but it's not as if you're a 7, you never use your heart. Right. And so maybe you've leaned more into your heart space over time, or you grow into your gut space and you're able to set more boundaries, or, have something that gives you that aha gut instinct more, because you're leaning more into that. So you just develop a higher capacity in that when you open yourself to growth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that kind of answer without answering? My solid answer is that your type doesn't change, but that the way you see it and the way you transform absolutely can change. It's not that you can't change. You're just changing within the system.
Yeah, I think that from the last test I took and the one that we did together, I definitely really the last time I did it, I kind of just barely tipped over into more of a 2 than a 7. And then when we did it, I tipped more into a 7 than a 2. And through our conversation, I kind of learned that because I totally identify as a 2. It's like the helper, and I love helping people. Yeah. But I think one of the things that we discussed was like your motivation behind helping. And I didn't identify with the motivation of a 2 as much as I identified with the motivation of helping people through a 7. Where I definitely in the past identified more of that motivation of helping in the 2 camp, and how I guess through my own work and where I am at now, how I've leaned more into a 7. So I'm like that. I don't know. I just find that stuff really fascinating, because it's not like I'm going through life thinking about like my motivations to helping people or those sorts of things. But again, it's helpful to, at least for me, especially thinking in like when I do have those like mindful conversations of like, what do I want my life to look like? Where am I going? How do I want my career to play into what my values are and where my life is going? Of knowing those motivations and what's like truly important to me plays in those decision making of like where my life is going. So like on like a day-to-day surface level, it's like those things aren't top of mind. But when I really think about what I'm getting out of my life, like knowing those things about myself is super important.
Absolutely. And it's important in our interactions with other people, and realizing, oh, wow, we are coming at this situation or this problem or this relationship with kind of a common goal, but for 2 totally different, motivations, in the way that we're approaching it. It's good to know about yourself, and also good to know about others. And that's, I think, why it can be so good in whether it's friendships or with coworkers or in relationships, to step back and say, oh, I get why you're doing that. Or I might even see, someone coming at something much more aggressively than I would, and have to step back and say, they're not being aggressive towards me. Like, they're aggressively going towards this goal. And that's part of their core type and how they run towards what they're passionate about. Right. And so it can be really good, because we can stop taking each other so personally. I love the teacher that I learned from, he talks about it as lenses. And it's funny because you and I are both wearing glasses right now, but if we swapped lenses, right, we wouldn't see as well. But it would also give us that perspective of like, oh, like Amanda and I both have the same goal right now, recording this podcast, but we're looking at it through a different lens. And that goes for everything. people, the old adage of like taking a walk in someone else's shoes. I think the lenses are so much more powerful because we don't have that same prescription. And so we're seeing the problem differently. And I think the Enneagram is amazing at helping us realize that.
Yeah. Well, you bring up just like knowing your interactions with other people. I've done that before in a workplace, and it was super helpful to understand because like there was 6 of us and every single one of us was a different number. So it was like, oh, this is eye-opening to see how we're all coming at things differently. And it's come up as I started this new job a few weeks ago. This conversation has come up a couple times of the Enneagram and, have they done that in the past? Because we're a whole brand new team, but we're all like together. So there's like currently there's 3, 4, like 6, 7 of us, like all kind of like on the floor on like the same team. So the discussion has come up several times just in the past few weeks of like, oh, like we should all do like an Enneagram so we understand how to interact with each other because we're all here with the same common goal. But obviously we have different roles and our personalities and who we are good for these different roles. But obviously what you're doing lends more to a different personality type than what I'm doing. So how do we speak each other's languages? So it's funny how that has already come up of like, we obviously like all get along and this is cool so far, but like we should deep dive because we're going to get into like some serious weeds together in our job. And this will help us communicate to each other so we can communicate out in the world better. Is that something that you do? Do you do like teams of people in workplaces and do all of their Enneagram together?
Yeah. So I've done a couple groups that are more casual or they're like a digital work group, but they don't necessarily work together. I have worked with a team before and it's really cool to see people. So one of the things I talk about is, some people you're talking about in working with a team are interacting in a certain way because their goal is to achieve autonomy. And so for 8s, 9s, and 1s, they want to achieve autonomy, but for different reasons. And they're going to go about that in a different way. 2s, 3s, and 4s, they kind of want to seek attention. And 5s, 6s, and 7s want security. Again, all for different reasons. And so when we're coming at that same problem, we still have this different kind of underlying goal and motivation. And so it's so helpful to work with teams and to watch them have those ahas of, oh, that's why our manager comes at us with this type of question. Whereas with someone else, they might have never even thought of that because it's not on their radar for like how their personality would approach that problem. And one example that I love to give is 3s and 6s. So 3s are very driven towards goals. They are efficient and goal-oriented and that sort of thing. 6s are amazing to have on teams also. So amazing for different reasons. 6s are loyal and they're curious, but they also can get a bad rap for being worst case scenario thinkers because they can think of all the possible ways that something can go wrong. So imagine your new job at the nature center and you're trying to plan and problem solve around something. And you've got a 3 who's like, let's get this done. Like here are the steps. It's like, this is the 5-step plan and this is how we're going to do it. And the 6 is breaking down, asking really thoughtful questions about like, wait a minute, I see between step 3 and step 4, we missed XYZ, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you knew that about each other, the 3 would know the 6 isn't questioning me, isn't thinking I'm stupid. The 6 is a really thoughtful person questioning the process, right? And I've had 3s before tell me like, oh my gosh, people who ask questions in meetings drive me bananas. But like, think about all the things in our world that 3s, 7s, and 8s are the most assertive, forward-moving types. And so those types can get annoyed when they're slowed down.
Yeah,
right?
I identify with that.
And it's really funny because I'm and they're future oriented, 3s, 7s, and 8s. And so I'm a 1, as I mentioned, so I'm oriented to present and I highly identify with 6. So I am very curious and ask a lot of questions. And so when you can always tell I have felt very steamrolled in meetings by people who are, it's almost like I'm seeing, you can be seen as like that, oh, she's just being anxious, or she's just, whereas, if you all got that, this is the why behind it. Her motivation is she wants to make this process the best it can be. And like, whether it's work the best for the clients or, whatever that is. And so I think when I work with teams, it's so cool to see that we are really all working towards that common goal, which can be so frustrating for a manager or for a team lead when they feel like you're kind of scattered, but it's like, no, we really are all working towards the common goal. We're just like, the 3 is saying, here's the 5-step plan. And the 6 is like, has a question for each of the 5 steps, maybe 5 questions for each. So I hope that that's a helpful example of why it can be so good as a team to know, like, oh, she's not picking my plan apart, you know?
Well, so. I mean, not only is that super helpful, but I think it's even helpful for just even those sorts of things within my own head of knowing that I identify as a 3 and I also identify as a 2. So part of me of like just even understanding myself. So part of me is like, yeah, keep it going. Like we got goals to do, but also as a 2, as this person that's like this deep feeler, sensitive person and caring about like how other people are doing this. So it's like, it's almost like they tangle with each other a little bit.
Do.
And so then how I can get frustrated within myself and then how that gets presented to other people because I'm going through this like internal war in my head of 2 different ways of operating that are basically like screaming in my brain.
Yeah, it is. Well, you can kind of approach yourself with compassion, right? And then realize that plays out in interactions with others too, because it's like, oh, that's why they're doing that. Or that's why I feel annoyed with that person, or they felt annoyed with me. Those sorts of things. And even knowing the head, heart, gut, that's like the very basics of it. But knowing that I first process, which you kind of just said without saying it, that you process through that lens of, I've thought about this, I'm going to do it. And then your heart's like, well, did you think about this? Did you think about their feelings? Did you think about how that would impact? So as a gut type, I always have a gut feel, but then my heart's like, hey, check in, like, how is this decision going to impact the people you care about or others? And then my head makes the list. And so I always go gut, heart, head, kind of in that order. And it's good to know in a friendship or a relationship, even, oh, that's why that person is always overthinking, because they kind of go to their head last, in terms of they have this gut feel, but then their heart's pulling them somewhere else. And then they're making a pro-con list. And we do have that war in our head. So it's good to know, it's good to know about yourself.
Yeah. And I know we had this discussion when we went through, like, my chart was I'm head, heart, gut, but I'm really working on trying to lean into the gut first. Like of like really trusting my intuition and going into those gut feelings instead of having a gut feeling and then immediately being like, nope. And like out, like rationalizing it and then letting my head take over. Of like, when I do trust my gut and I go with that immediately, things work out so much more smooth. Like everything just kind of falls into line more, but how much I just out of operating that way for forever, like it goes that way, but then I'll get myself stuck in more of a tangle by letting my head take over. So I think also just recognizing that about myself, but then not saying that that's bad, but also saying how it doesn't serve me, of like, how do you try to like, okay, I am all of these things, but how can I massage them in a different order to serve me better? Which is a process.
It really is. But it's like, you're in like the top 1% if you're even noticing that, right? Like most people, I always say, like, most people don't sit around thinking about these things, and they aren't even self-aware enough to say, I really don't use my gut, or I really don't use my head, or man, I rarely go to my heart. I had someone tell me once, like, I have no idea what it would feel like to access my heart space. Like they're so far removed from that. And in Enneagram language, we call that a repressed center. And so, or it can kind of be in your shadow. Like you've probably heard people talk about shadow work, that sort of thing. But those things, when I found out that ones are thinking repressed, I was like, I am not thinking repressed. I think all of the time. And then I heard kind of a master Enneagram teacher talk about it. And she said, ones, twos, and sixes are thinking repressed. It doesn't mean that they're not thinking. It means their thinking isn't productive.
Oh.
So they're always overthinking. And I think it's really cool to think about that in terms of our repressed center. So you even said, like, I'm really trying to lean into my gut, but my instinct is to tell my gut no. So your gut thinking isn't productive if you're not able to go with it. So I would say your gut center is probably repressed, right?
Yeah.
But if you're able to say, like, okay, hold on, let's stay with that. Or working from a thought perspective and knowing, like, okay, I can, instead of having these 15 million jumbled thoughts, like, let's bring this together. Like, being able to rein it in and notice it is huge. Because
it's difficult.
Yeah.
And I think it's also different for each individual of finding the tools that help you do it. Like, so
for sure.
For me, trying to lean more into that, especially in the past year, going through very massive, big life changes,
Right.
like really big, like all of like so many of like the big things. I'm doing
all
them
at
all
once.
together.
Just do them all at once. Yeah.
Of like, so when I want to get into this really heady worry space, everything that could go wrong, I'm like, my messaging that helps me is to just like go with the flow. Go with the flow, let it flow, and like let things go. I have a really hard time letting things go, which just backs me up and make things worse. But I recognize that. So it's not that those things aren't happening all the time. Like for me, the language that helps me try to like untangle the knots or just like let it flow, like get out of your head. Like your gut feeling was to do this, and now your brain wants to tell you 10 reasons why not to do it, of just like, let it flow. I imagine myself just like laying in a river and like letting it go wherever it takes me, of like, I can't control it, but my natural instinct so much is to be like, I'm going to bend this river to go exactly the way I want it. And like, you can't do that. Chill out. And like, imagine where it's going to take you if you weren't swimming upstream the whole entire time. Like you're exhausting yourself, letting your brain just freak out all the time, or just coming up with like 8,000 scenarios that aren't helping the actual present moment. So like, especially going through so much of that now, like through change, like big scary stuff, like buying a house and selling a house and all of these things, like my brain really wants to be on fire. And so of like trusting of like, this is happening the way it's supposed to, just let it go and let it like unfold the way it's supposed to, and calming myself into that helps. So to me, getting more into the gut and the heart, I would say, and I know you're the expert on that, than just letting my head come up with like 1,000 scenarios of like everything that could go wrong.
So funny. Cause like, I love visuals, and I pictured you like on the raft on the river, but you're like really close to the rocky banks. And I just pictured you putting your arms and legs like in a starfish position and like holding yourself still with the rocks. Like, wait, this is not the way we're going to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it can be just so hard to do that. But I love that you have kind of this mantra of, hey, let's let this flow. And what's interesting is that the head tendency is, when they're stressed, is to go towards security. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, is this safe? Is it going to work out? Am I going to be secure? You're kind of questioning those things. And so if I can keep control and swim upstream, that's how I'll keep safe, or that's how I know I'll be secure. If I can think of all the possible scenarios, then we'll be good. You know, we have these tactics and these stories where it's like, you know, this has worked for me before. Like if I just have all the possible scenarios in my head, then I know I'm good, rather than just, hey, I know that this was the right decision. I trust myself, like, and we can just flow with it. Like, how much better did that sound even when you said it and you sounded so peaceful, but then when you started to talk about the head process, you can even hear it, like the chaos that like your mind wants to take you there. But that heart, gut, initial statement you started with was so much more like calm and peaceful.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like your true self speaking, and your ego's like, no. This is how we keep safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, 100%.
you know, that ego or that false self is, it's coming up with that list of ways of like, wait a minute, Amanda, are you sure this is right? Do we need to protect ourselves here? It's amazing how, you know, our ego can do that to us of, hey, let's make sure we keep telling this old story. And for you to say, I can go with the flow. I'm safe here. I'm good to go with the flow and take that old story. I sometimes tell clients to, you know, take an old book or just pretend and write on the binding of the old book, like make up a title for that old story, like you're not safe here or whatever that is, and put it up on a shelf that you would actually have to reach for, but that's still visible to remind yourself like, hey, this is an old story that is no longer serving me. Nothing about it is serving me, and I don't need to open that book. So it can be a kind of a cool way to say, hey, that's my false self talking, or that's my ego talking. Like, we don't need to open that story today. That chapter is closed, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I also think it's like, it's going into the whole like growth and change conversation and having the Enneagram and understanding these things about yourself. Like, at least I think it's also important, at least for me, to also have the narrative, like, I'm not trying to change myself because I think what I'm doing is bad. Like, I'm this bad person. I have to change. Like, so much of the language, using that of my whole journey is like weight loss. Like this, who you are is not good. You need to be skinnier to be better. Like, if not like having that, like who you are sucks. This has to change. But it's also like from the scenario I just brought up of like where my head goes of like, this doesn't serve me. This makes me feel chaotic. This makes me feel not good. I want to change this so I can feel more at peace because that's where I want to be. Like that feels better to me. That makes me enjoy my life more. That's why I'm looking to change. It's not because like I'm bad or I hate this version of myself. It's because I don't want to live in like chaos and have my brain feel like it's on fire all the time, which it has for most of my life. The only way that's going to change is by me changing it and rewiring those new paths and just talking about like those old scenarios. Another like visualization that I use because I love hiking. It's like, you aren't just going to take a machete and create a new path and like that's going to be easy. And all of a sudden that path is going to be easy to walk the next 20 times. Like you have to like chop down the path, which is going to suck because you're going to get cut up and you're going to get poison ivy and you're going to itch and like everything else. And then you have to walk that path over and over and over again when it's so much easier to walk down the other path. If you walked like that trail is just like pristine because you've been there 1,000 times, but like this way is better and it's going to give you a new route that is going to make your life easier, but you have to like go through the mess to create it, and like the process just blows. So I understand why most people like avoid doing it because it is not easy and it is not fun and it is time consuming. And also as an impatient person, I hate how long it takes.
It takes forever. Right. And something that you started with, which again, I go back to, it sounds like the chaos, the part that you're wanting to get rid of is in your mind. And when you talk about that place of peace, that place you're looking to get to, that feels like, even hearing you talk about it, it feels so intuitive. Like, it, what it feels like in your body to feel that way. Like you've even used the analogy twice about your brain being on fire.
Or I often use bees in my brain. It feels like bees in my brain.
And I just imagine like letting your heart and gut come into play more is almost like dumping. Wait, have you watched? Why did this just, I'm in a very visual place today. Have you watched the movie Frozen 2?
No.
Oh, there's like a little fire lizard and he will like, he's so cute, but he will like kind of be on fire and Elsa will like sprinkle snowflakes on him and then he'll smile and go, ah. So I just pictured you like, you got a little like snowflake sprinkling on your brain and it's like able to just like bring it down and say like, my body knows, my heart knows, like I'm safe here. This is good. But you also said something else that I don't think anyone who is doing the growth work can miss here is, and the research all points to this, you cannot grow from a place of guilt or shame. Mm-hmm. And you said, right at the beginning of what you were just saying, you were talking about how the body shaming kind of piece of it. Yeah. And it's like, none of that, like, I should be this way. Like, none of that can get us to that growth. It's the machete in the path. It's putting in the work and being passionate and convicted about it. Not, I'm so shameful about the way I'm feeling or the way my body looks or whatever that is. It's saying, hey, I'm ready to tell a new story, or I'm ready to carve a new path, whatever analogy you want to use. And it stinks because those old paths are still there. They're so worn. But the more you keep taking this other path, the more you are able to respond that way. Yeah. But it takes work, over time.
Well, I just think that's such a powerful piece of the Enneagram too, is like, you can do this. I mean, it's all again, like where you're at and how you want to utilize these things. Like you could hire you as a coach and find your Enneagram number and be like, okay, I have this knowledge about myself. Now I'm going to put that in a folder and put it up on a shelf. And like, I know that about me. And so now if I have like a coffee conversation, I can be like, I'm a 2, you know what I mean? Right. Of like, I know my Enneagram number, and you can just go there and that's fine. And that's awesome. Right. Or, again, like this knowledge can take you anywhere. Or how do you work with your partner or your coworkers or your friends? You could take it to that sort of level of like, I have this knowledge about myself. I want to know this knowledge about you, about how we work together. Or you can take it like in a level like where I am, where it's like, okay, I've learned this about myself, but this is where I would like to go. And this seems like it serves me better. And so how do I use this information about myself, and how do I grow within this to something that is where I want my life to lead to? And I'm learning about what my old patterns are, but how do I make new patterns? So I just think that the knowledge of it goes so far beyond just this like, pop culture, just kind of like, I'm going to take a personality test on Facebook and I'm going to get an answer popped out. Like, you can use it for that, but you can also use this as such a tool into how does it make your life more like deeper, meaningful, and, with yourself or with everyone around you. I just think it's so cool how you can utilize it.
Yeah. It's funny you said like the Facebook test, because I think of like, I went through a phase, I don't know, maybe we all did, when the internet started to become, I'm aging myself, like more popular. And it would be like, which Disney princess are you? And I think of it like that. Whenever I see it broken down to these stereotypes, it makes me so sad, because I'm like, this is not like a Rapunzel is a type 4 sort of thing. Like, it's deeper than that. And what you just said, like, I can give a specific example as a type 1 is my stress number, quote unquote. The number I go to in stress is 4, and 4s are very deeply connected to their emotions, and 1s often aren't. And so you can also find gifts in your stress number. So this is another way that the Enneagram, it can play out. And it's like, there doesn't need to be shame there. It can be, when I am stressed, like resting in type 4 allows me to feel everything without judgment. It's like, oh, I can just like be in my feelings and be compassionate with myself. Like I would like a small child, And so it's cool to see, but I don't need to stay there. Right. But I know that I'm safe in that space. And I love that it is that, instead of just like, you are a type 1 and that's it. Like, what, I don't think that helps, like, to put it back up on the shelf.
I mean, humans are dynamic. Like, you can't I'm just one shade of like color. Like, we are just so many different things. And I think that, I mean, every human, I don't care like what you got going on, like everybody has a million things going on. And so like, you can't just put somebody in just one box and be like, that's defining who you are. Right. And what I found interesting, you bringing up being a 4 with the more feeling your emotions and stuff like that. That's when I've taken this test before that did not even like rank at all.
Yeah.
But when we did
this
it,
time though,
it did.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's because of so much the work that I've been doing. And that's a lot of like also my therapy is just like feel your feelings, which I am definitely a numb out person. I am let's disassociate, like let's numb out. I don't want to feel this. I will have like, or in the past, like just like I will like have explosive episodes because I don't know how to feel my feelings. I don't know how to deal with them. And that's been a lot of work that I've put in the past several years of like, how do I sit in this yucky stuff and like, how do I actually feel it and then let it pass through me? So to me, like that is validation by taking it, again, like seeing it to like where I can feel like I know I'm working on it, but you really can't see yourself that clearly a lot of the times of like, or at least how far you've come, especially with stuff like that. It's not like a visual, like I can see that I have abs now and I didn't before, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
So it's one of those things of like, cool, that is showing up on my chart now of like, because I've been working on that of actually like feeling my feelings and getting more into that space because it's helpful. So I'm like, it's cool that that's like registering now.
It is. And I think this brings kind of that piece of like common humanity. And when you talked about how we're all different colors, that's why no two people, like if you and I were the same type, we still might look really different because you might have a lot more of a shade of 4 than I do, or I might have a lot more of a shade of 5 than you do. And so when you think of it as like a color wheel, like what color we each come out as is different, because I know a lot of ones who have really high capacity in 3 also. My 3, like if we're talking about a test, is like a 3%. And so you can see those as areas of growth, not just like, oh, well, I'm low in 3, I'm going to move along. Like what you just said, like I used to be low in 4 and you scored 65% in 4 when you did the test with me. And again, a test is a test, but I think it's cool to see how we can develop those capacities as we become more aware. I also, my favorite thing about Enneagram work, a client said to me the other day, she said, every time I leave an hour with you, I feel less alone. And I think so often these stories, that we tell ourselves, and each type kind of has a story, like I'm not worthy of love, or I have to do X, Y, Z in order to be good enough. These stories we tell ourselves, we're so in our head about them, or so in our heart about them, or holding those stories in our body that we don't realize we're all walking around with that, like we're all walking around with a story that's kind of a wound, of like this thing I'm carrying, like I have to get good grades and be a good girl, or I have to do, I have to look a certain way to be loved. And when we realize that other people are walking around with that story too, I remember when I realized that like type 1s have the strongest inner critic. And I was like, oh my gosh, other people have an inner critic. I was sad for other people, but I also felt less alone. Right. And so this, I think self-compassion work, they call it common humanity. It's like, oh, other people have these feelings too. And that can just be like really like a sigh of relief. Like I feel myself breathing more deeply, even just saying it right now,
Well, I just feel like that with, well, at least culturally in our society now, which is just so isolated, fights against our human nature, which is just human nature to want to be connected and feel connected to other people. Yes. So I feel like the feeling of not feeling alone is so huge. I mean, that's one of the reasons I started this podcast is I felt so much of my journey was by myself. Nobody understood what I couldn't talk out loud about like the binge eating I was doing or what I felt about myself or all the stories I was telling myself. I just felt like so shameful and alone in that. But like when you open that up and be like, wow, so many other people identify with this. And whenever you talk about it together, like then you have that connection and how it's so much easier for everybody to collectively move forward. I feel like, just that feeling of not feeling alone is so powerful. And I feel like we tend to lose that a lot, or I'm going off on a tangent here where I think social media has the power to really bring that together and open that up in a positive way, but it also has the power to really close that off because you're putting out this version that you think that everybody wants to see or makes you feel better or safer, that you're not being vulnerable or you're putting up a fake story to create like this connection of you're not alone, but you're also not coming from a true place out of your own fears, which is fair. That's not a bad thing. So I'm like, that's why I think, I don't know, social media is just so interesting where it can be so powerful in both ways, but ultimately it's because the reason why it exists and is so popular is we're all craving so much connection to each other.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the last few years, we had to rely on a lot of more false connection, not false, just different ways of connecting. Yeah. And I think we've done it. It's been a disservice to not being able to, connect in real ways. And it's so hard to think about how do we do that again? Or like, how do we make sure we're connecting in these truer ways? And I've had several people tell me, I think my social media friends like know me better than like my real friends, because it feels like a safer way to like put your true self out there, because it's not so like, if you're right here in front of me, the rejection feels different. Yeah, for sure. Than if you're across the waves of the internet and I can just unfollow you, So it could be so toxic, but it could also be so good. So yeah, because that's why it's like space. It can swing both ways, where it's like I can be way more vulnerable in this space because it feels safer, or you can be that person that writes awful comments to somebody because you have that level of separation. That's another podcast. That's another podcast. But it's like, that's where it's just like, man, it is just like, it's just this, interesting world to navigate. But I just, I started that conversation by ultimately saying like, we just really want to feel connected to each other. Yes. And just even in the last podcast I did, we talked about how it's even meaningful for me and how much it's helpful for me when people share their struggles and the things that they have failed at. Like, I connect to that. So I want to hear success stories. I love success stories. Hear them all day. But like hearing when people talk about like what failed, like I'm like, oh, like does that to me feels like a deeper connection of like, that's hard and scary to say out loud. But like, thank God, me too. Like I felt I was beating myself up for this because I thought I was the only person that was failing at this. But I'm like, oh, sigh of relief. Like, no, it's both of us. And like, not that I'm celebrating your failures, but it's like, I don't know. It's just this different level of connection that, I can't really explain. I didn't go to school for that, but it just creates something that I think is, just kind of magical sometimes. The psychologists call that common humanity. Okay. And it's, we forget it sometimes because we get so wrapped up in our culture values being independent and values, and we forget that we are created for connection, when we're out there trying to strive and meet these goals and, everyone's quote unquote busy and independent and doing their thing, but we need each other. We need that common humanity. Well, speaking of connection, so if somebody is listening to this and they're like, oh, dang, like I need to do a deep dive into my Enneagram, whether it's just for me or me in a group of people, like what's the best way to go about that, to connect with you? What's the process look like, et cetera? Yeah. So you mentioned earlier, my business is Bloom Where You're Planted, Scentsy. So that's also my website. And I'm on Instagram as Ennea Blooms. So it's the beginning of Enneagram, ENNEA, and then Blooms. So it kind of combines Enneagram and my business name. And I do a lot of teaching through Instagram. I've kind of been on a bit of a hiatus because of how crazy things have been with my family. I have 2 little kids and they'll be home for summer very soon. But I love to connect with people via a discovery session. And anytime someone's curious about that, I'll do, a 15-minute call to talk about it. And a discovery session is, if you want to take an Enneagram test, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And we just really, well, Amanda can attest, I ask a lot of really curious questions to try and get to the bottom of how you came to tell your story and maybe what type you might fit into. But I'm never going to be the teacher or coach who puts you in a box. I want you to really do that work for yourself and realize that the goal isn't to be put in a box. Some clients do a discovery session and then kind of go off and do their own research or reading. Others continue to see me and do some specific growth work through the Enneagram, which is really fun. So I love all that. And my Instagram handle connects you to my website and my email and all of those things. So that's probably the easiest way to get to me.
Okay. Yeah. And I'll put those all in the show notes. And I mean, obviously, as a testimonial, as if this whole podcast wasn't a big testimonial of mine, of like, I find it like super helpful. And again, just like having knowledge about yourself, maybe in a way that you haven't discovered those knowledge about yourself, or just, again, a deeper dive than I'm going to do this all on the internet. It's going to spit me out an answer. I'm going to read 3 paragraphs and that, like, that's supposed to define me, of like having, again, these like this conversation where you're doing deep dives to kind of like really navigate those things about yourself. I think is super helpful. So I hope that anybody that has any interest in this, or maybe has done it before and is looking for a deeper dive, can reach out and can really like do some awesome discovering about themselves.
Yes. I love that.
Well, Beth, thank you so much.
AmandaValentineBites.com